when my daughter-in-law held the plate full of food in front of me, and instead of handing it over, diverted to serve her husband, my son, I felt something break inside my chest. It wasn't just my stomach grumbling softly with hunger. It was my dignity. It was my soul. She passed me by as if I were a forgotten piece of furniture in the corner of the room, served my son, served her mother-in-law who was visiting, even served the neighbor who showed up unexpectedly. Everyone received generous, steaming, fragrant plates. Everyone, except me. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were as cold as ice. "You've already eaten too much," she said with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. And there, at that table that I myself had chosen years ago, surrounded by people who were supposed to be my family, I understood that I had become invisible within my own story. Seeing him happy, and when he asked me to live with him, when he said they were having financial difficulties, I didn't just open the door to my house, I handed over the key. But gratitude, I discovered too late, is a feeling that vanishes in the presence of those who refuse to see it. And my daughter-in-law didn't want to see anything beyond her own navel. To her, I was the obstacle between her and the dream house. She didn't see a woman who had worked for decades to conquer those walls. She saw an old woman who was getting in the way of her plans. If you're following this account and stories like this touch your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. These real-life testimonies need to be heard, because one woman's story can be a mirror of the pain of so many others who suffer in silence. The humiliations intensified. She started throwing birthday parties for my grandson, where I wasn't invited to help organize. She would arrive with bags of decorations, hire photographers, fill the house with people, and I would find out everything on the day, like a stranger. "Oh, I didn't want to bother you. I know you like to rest," she would say with that fake smile that nauseated me. Once I found a family WhatsApp group where everyone was, except me. They planned lunches, outings, decisions about renovations in the house, my house, and I was excluded from the conversation. I tried to talk to my son countless times. "Son, I feel invisible here," he would sigh, massaging his temples as if I were a recurring headache. "Mom, you're exaggerating. It's your imagination. We love you, but you need to understand that we have our life, our plans, as if I were a hindrance to their plans, as if my existence were an inconvenience to be managed. The financial situation also began to worry me. At first they promised to split the bills, but their contributions became increasingly irregular. There was always an excuse. The car broke down, the baby needed a private pediatrician, she needed a new dress for a wedding, and I, the idiot, accepted it. I paid the electricity bill alone, the water, the supermarket, while they went out to dinner at expensive restaurants and posted smiling photos on social media. But the worst wasn't the public humiliations or the financial exploitation. The worst was the emotional isolation. I, who have always been a communicative woman, full of friends with a social life, began to distance myself from people. I was ashamed to tell what was happening, ashamed to admit that my own son allowed them to treat me that way. My friends called me less because I always refused invitations. "Oh, I can't today. It's my grandson's birthday. I'm going to stay with him." A lie. I stayed locked in the room while they had the party in the living room, but I couldn't admit that to anyone. And then that day arrived. The day of the plate that didn't come. We were all gathered, a rare situation, because they usually ate before I arrived or after I went to the room. But that Sunday, her mother was visiting, and she wanted to make a point of showing off her culinary skills. She prepared a complete feijoada, the kind that makes the whole house smell cozy. My stomach rumbled in anticipation. I hadn't eaten a decent meal in days, limiting myself to quick sandwiches and fruit in my room so as not to disrupt their routine. When she started serving the plates, I sat down at the table, thinking I would finally be included. And that's when it happened. The plate passing by me, the venomous phrase, the complicit silence of the others, and something inside me, which had been cracked for months, finally broke completely. But instead of collapsing in tears as she expected, instead of getting up and running away in shame, I felt something different being born in the midst of the pain. Anger. A clean, just, liberating anger. I took a deep breath. I counted to 10. I looked at each face at that table. My son, a coward. Her mother, malicious. The neighbor, uncomfortable. And her, the daughter-in-law, with that satisfied smile of someone who had just won a battle. Only she didn't know she had just lost the war. I slowly got up from the chair, with the dignity of someone who had carried the world on their back, and never bent their spine. "You know," I began in a calm, firm voice, "you're right, I really have eaten too much. I ate humiliation for breakfast. I ate disrespect for lunch. I ate ingratitude for dinner. You're right, I'm satisfied." Her smile faltered, "But there's one thing I'm not going to swallow anymore, the silence. I'm no longer going to keep quiet in the face of the shamelessness you have of living in my house, eating my food, using my electricity, my water, my comfort, and treating me as if I were a nuisance." My son tried to interrupt me. "Mom, It's not like that. I raised my hand, silencing him for the first time in my life. Now you're going to listen to me, because okay, here is the English translation, staying faithful to the original content, format and punctuation. For 3 years I listened to you. I listened to her. I heard excuses, empty promises, pathetic justifications. Now it's my turn. I went to the kitchen drawer and took out a folder I had quietly prepared over the past few months when I finally opened my eyes to reality. Inside it were copies of all the bills I paid alone, all the expenses I made for them, all the bank statements showing their non-existent contribution. Do you know how much you owe me? 43,000 reais. And that's just adding up the last 2 years of split bills that only I paid. Not counting food, not counting the expensive gifts I bought for the baby, not counting the renovation of the room that was done and came out of my pocket. The silence now was different. It was the silence of shock, of discovered guilt, of unmasked lies. But you know what's sadder? It's not the money. It's that you stole something much more valuable from me. You stole my peace, my joy, my dignity, and that is priceless. Her mother-in-law tried to interject. Look at the lack of manners, talking like that in front of guests. I turned to her with a look that made her shrink in her chair. You, who got rich at the expense of your husband's work and never worked a day in your life, have no right to talk about education to me. I worked 42 years educating other people's children, including saving some from negligent mothers like you, from what I've heard. So spare me your cheap hypocrisy. I turned to my daughter-in-law, who was now pale. You thought you broke me, didn't you? You thought you turned me into a small, scared, invisible woman. But you know what you did? You woke me up. You reminded me of who I always was before I started shrinking myself to fit into your petty little world. I am Maria Augusta Santos, a retired teacher, a strong widow, a mother who raised a son alone, a woman who built wealth with sweat and honesty, and I'm not going to ask permission to exist inside my own home anymore. I picked up my cell phone and showed them the screen. 2 weeks ago I looked for a lawyer. He advised me on my rights. This house is in my name. You are here because of my generosity, not by right, and my generosity ended today, along with that plate you didn't serve me. I took a deep breath before continuing. You have 60 days to find another place to live. I will issue an official notification, all correct, within the law, and if you want to question it, great. Then we'll go to the judge, and I'll take this folder, plus the witnesses I've already gathered, plus the horrible messages you send me, and then delete, but which I learned how to screenshot. She finally found her voice, but it was trembling. You can't do this. What about your grandson? Are you going to kick us out of the house and leave your grandson on the street? I smiled, but it was a sad smile. My grandson will be in the house that you will rent with the money you earn and that you were saving at my expense until now. He will be fine, because unlike you, I will continue to be present in his life. But now on my terms, I will visit him, I will give him gifts, I will be the loving grandmother I always have been, but I will no longer be the woman you step on to feel bigger. My son finally spoke, and there were tears in his eyes. Mom, I didn't realize it was that bad. You realized it, son. You just chose to pretend you didn't, because it was more convenient, easier to have a happy wife and a silent mother than to face the truth. My voice broke a little, but I regained my composure. You disappointed me, not because you married her, but because you forgot who I am. You forgot everything I did. You chose his peace instead of my dignity, and that, son, hurts more than any mean word she can say. I left the kitchen and went to my room. I locked the door, and there, alone, I finally let the tears fall. But they were different tears. They were not of humiliation or defeat. They were of liberation, of relief, of a woman who finally found herself again after years lost in a role that never suited her, the role of the silent victim. In the days that followed, the house became tense. They tried to talk to me, apologize, promise changes, but I was firm. It wasn't about forgiveness or resentment. It was about dignity and limits. Some things, when broken, don't go back to what they were, and my tolerance was one of them. I maintained the 60-day deadline, not out of cruelty, but because it was fair. It was the time that the law advised me to give, and I have always been a woman of respecting the laws, whether they are legal or moral. During this period, something interesting happened. I started to recover my life. I called friends I had abandoned. I went back to the church craft group. I enrolled in a painting course I always wanted to take. I started using my living room again, cooking my own meals, watching had the television on at the volume I wanted, and with each day, I felt more whole, more alive, more myself. My daughter-in-law still tried to manipulate me emotionally. She'd put the baby in front of me, crying, as if that would make me change my mind. But I wasn't kicking out my grandson. I was kicking out the toxicity that was poisoning my house. He will always be welcome here, I told her. But you need to learn to respect boundaries, and if you can't do that living here, you'll have to learn by doing it from a distance. On the 50th day, they found an apartment, small but decent. And you know what happened? For the first time, I saw my son take responsibility. He worked more, picked up extra hours, adjusted their standard of living to the reality they had. and she, my daughter-in-law, had to learn that the world didn't revolve around her whims. They had to grow up. They had to mature. And deep down, I knew I was doing them good too, even if it hurt. On moving day, I helped pack some things. Not out of obligation, but because I was still a mother, I still had love in my heart. I just didn't have room for disrespect anymore. When they left, with the truck full of belongings, my son hugged me at the door. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I was a coward." "You were," I agreed, but I squeezed the hug tighter. But cowards can learn to be brave, just not at my expense. When the house was empty, silent, just mine, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the peace of sad loneliness, it was the peace of someone who had regained their sovereignty. I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, the walls, remembering how much I fought to build that space, and I promised myself I would never let anyone make me forget my worth again. Today, months later, I have a different relationship with my son and daughter-in-law. They visit me, I visit them, I see my grandson regularly. But there is respect now. There are healthy boundaries. She no longer calls me ma'am with that condescending tone. She calls me Mary, and there is genuine reverence when she does, because she learned, the hard way, that women like me aren't born overnight. We are forged in struggles, tempered in pain, polished in resilience. And I learned something precious. Kindness is not weakness, but allowing them to abuse your kindness is. Love doesn't mean accepting any treatment. It means knowing when to hold on, and when to let go. Family is not who shares your blood, but who honors your story. And home is not just a physical place. It's where your soul can rest without armor, where your voice can sound without fear, where your presence is celebrated, not tolerated. To those women who are reading this and see themselves in some piece of my story, I say you are not the problem. Your presence is not a burden. Your past of sacrifices is not something to be forgotten or minimized. You deserve respect, not for being perfect, but for being human, for having fought, for having loved, for having given your best, even when your best was not recognized. Don't be afraid to take up space. Don't shrink yourself to fit the limited view others have of you. Don't ask permission to be treated with dignity. Demand it, with firmness, with self-love, with the silent strength of someone who knows their worth. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see wrinkles that weren't there before. I see whiter hair, more tired eyes. But I also see something that had disappeared. I see a sparkle. I see a woman standing, head held high, heart healed. A woman who almost got lost in the role of mother and forgot to be Mary, but who found herself again in the most unlikely moment, when she was denied a plate of food and she discovered that she was hungry, not for a hearty stew, but for respect. And if there's one lesson I carry from this whole story, it's simple and powerful. It's never too late to rescue yourself. It's never too late to say enough. It's never too late to remind the world, and especially yourself, of who you really are. Because in the end, the most important woman you need to feed every day is not at the table. She's in the mirror. And she deserves the best plate, with the best food, served with the best seasoning there is. Unshakable self-love.